Yes, good evening, Rachel. Quite a lot going on this week. As you know, on Tuesday, Israel launched a surprise round of airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. The Israeli government claims that Hamas were not serious about continuing the ceasefire. They still hold at least 24 living hostages and around 30 hostages who they've killed. No headway was being made with those talks, and the Israeli government say the only way to pressure Hamas is by force. The airstrikes were quite targeted in that they took out some senior figures in the Hamas leadership.
Yes, I mean,
However,
people will be
yes.
thinking at what appears to be, according to the Hamas Health Authority, a huge loss of life. Apparently, at least 591 people, including, they say, more than 200 children. What is the IDF, what is the Israeli government saying in response to
Well,
that?
Israel says those figures are entirely unreliable, and in fact, if you go on past figures in the last year and a half, there are multiple occasions where the Hamas Health Ministry came up with a figure and it was not accurate. Also, they produced a figure within about half an hour of the airstrikes beginning on Tuesday. It would be almost impossible to make an accurate count. Having said that, undoubtedly some civilians have been killed, and it is obviously horrendous. And I don't think anyone wants a continuation of this war, neither Palestinian nor Israeli. But it is, from Israel's point of view, untenable that Hamas should regroup and rearm as they were doing during the ceasefire. Israel wants Hamas to release the hostages, and they wanted to step down as the governing authority in Gaza so that everybody, most of all the population of Gaza, can move forward with a better life, not under an Iranian backed Islamic militia group, Hamas, controlling their lives.
But given the level of death in that in the strip, how how likely is any of that wish list ever going to be achievable now?
Well, Israel would argue that, they've tried everything else. They've been endless rounds of negotiations via Qatar, United States, and Egypt, and it's got nowhere. And Hamas are not some reasonable political party one negotiates with. A little bit like, look, ISIS, there were very strong airstrikes by the US, the UK, and others against ISIS in Iraq and Syria. ISIS weren't completely eradicated, they still exist, but they are out of power in Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa and Syria and so on. And although it's not perfect, there is a better life now for the inhabitants of Mosul and Raqqa, and there will be a better life for the inhabitants of Gaza if they're not under Hamas rule. No one wants anyone to die, but if there's a peaceful way of Hamas stepping aside, then I don't know what it is, and I don't
Yes,
think anyone's choosing
I don't know
to
what that looked
engage.
like. Before
Yeah.
before we move on to what's going on inside Israel itself, tell us what's happened to the Trump Gaza plan. Has that died a death, or is that still alive?
Well, I never think look, I don't think it was that much of a serious plan to begin with. What Trump did succeed in doing is opening up a conversation about post war Gaza and forcing various Arab governments to come up with some ideas. Because I don't think the population of Gaza are going to move, or certainly not by force. Maybe some will want to move, but that doesn't matter. I think Trump, as he often does, was trying to shake things up to start a conversation. And in that sense, it's still an open question as to what will happen in post war Gaza.
Well, what is going on in Gaza now has led to thousands of Israelis demonstrating, I suppose, against the government and anti-Netanyahu protests in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. They don't want this bombing to carry on because they think this risks the lives of the surviving hostages, don't they?
No, this is in fact the result of some misreporting in the British and
Okay.
elsewhere in the media. There are demonstrations going on against Netanyahu, but they're for internal reasons. Netanyahu is attempting to fire the head of the Shin Bet domestic intelligence service, and he also is rumored to want to fire the attorney general. Israel is a country without a constitution. It doesn't have a second chamber, so there's no sort of House of Lords equivalent. There's no,
No check
House of
on him.
yeah, well, less of a check, and therefore these protesters claim that Netanyahu will assume too much power if he dismisses the attorney general, and they claim this is a fight for internal Israeli democracy. Netanyahu would say that he's a duly elected government of 4 coalition parties with a clear majority, and he as the government should be able to choose who the head of the security services are, and it's not up to street protesters to make that decision.
Okay, it sounds quite Trumpy. I mean, in the sense that
It is a
President
bit
Trump appoints
Trumpy.
people and fires them within, as we've seen many, many times, within
Well,
minutes, hours, days,
well,
months.
it's not quite. It's a bit unfair to Netanyahu to compare him with Trump because the head of the Shin Bet, the security service, has been there since 2021, and some say he is partly to blame for the negligence that led to the
October
Hamas
7th.
attack. Yes, on in 2023, and there is a. It is a little bit different. There is a cabinet, like I said, with 4 different parties. It was a unanimous vote to dismiss the head of the Shin Bet, the security service. Having said that, Netanyahu himself put out a tweet on X in English rather than Hebrew, in which he compared his situation to that of America. He said, and I don't quote exactly, but off my memory, he said something like, whenever a right-wing government's elected, the kind of left-wing deep state do everything in their power to try and to stop us taking duly elected decisions. So he himself alluded to a comparison with what's happened in the United States.
Just lastly, what is the significance of Ben Gvir's return to cabinet? What does it tell us about the future path, do you think, of Netanyahu's war aims?
Yes, so for anyone who doesn't know, Ben Gvir is the leader of one of those smaller parties. He's extreme right wing, but this is to shore up the coalition. Now it has a 68-seat majority 68 seats of the 120 seats in the Israeli parliament. I don't think that he himself, Ben Gvir, will be directing war aims. It's very much Netanyahu and Netanyahu's advisors who are in control. But I just want to say one thing. Whereas no one really welcomes return to war, almost no one in Israel wants Hamas in power next door. Right wing, left wing, Israeli Jew, Israeli Arab, religious, secular. Almost nobody I can think of wants Hamas to continue in power. So it's a question of tactics of how to achieve that. There may be people who disagree with Israeli war tactics within Israel, but no one's happy with the situation that leaves Hamas in power.